Jake Kushner. I'm the reptile and amphibian specialist at the South Fork Natural History Museum. Today I'm going to give a little lecture about my eastern tiger salamander tracking project and an introduction to radio telemetry. So come on and join me.
And today we have SOFO's own Jake Kushner with us. He's going to give us a little information about our eastern tiger salamanders. But before we start that one, I just want to let everybody know that our next East End Environmental Lecture will be May 24th with Dr. Toby Curtis from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. And he will be speaking about tracking sharks in New York waters, what to know before you hit the beach. So right now, we're going to turn it over to Jake and take it away.
All right, so as Mel said, I'm Jake Kushner. I'm the reptile and amphibian specialist here at the South Fork Natural History Museum. Know most of you now. So I've been working on a project tracking eastern tiger salamanders in introduction to radio telemetry. So this is a really cool project that we're in the second year of here now. So I'd like to introduce the project, talk a little bit about the techniques I use for this project, and then what we've learned so far. After that, if anybody wants to join, we can go right outside in the nice mowed grass and just do a basic demo of this cool technique that I have. So in 2023, we received a grant from a foundation called the Holloman Price. They provide grants for ecological type projects. So this was to track the movements of eastern tiger salamanders around their breeding pools within the Long Pond Greenbelt. So the study is really to determine the area around the pools that these salamanders are using, what kind of habitat, where are they going, and that data can be used to inform local and state officials for future development projects within the Greenbelt and in other areas with vernal pools. So part of the reason this is so important is the status of the eastern tiger salamander. They are endangered. So they're on the decline. The populations are really struggling. Here on the East End in Bridgehampton is kind of on the edge of their range. It's one of the most extreme east populations. It is a stronghold though, so we'd like to keep it that way. The Long Pond Greenbelt is a really unique area. So the museum here is located within the Long Pond Greenbelt system. It's extremely significant ecologically wise. It's over 1,900 acres. It's forest, wetlands, and then 13 unique coastal plain ponds. Coastal plain ponds were formed by glacial activity for the most part, scored out large areas in the landscape that are connected to the water table. So this area has a really high variety of rare and imperiled plants and animals, including the state endangered tiger salamander. The Greenbelt's considered to be one of the most biodiverse areas in New York. It's a gem. We're in a pretty developed area of Long Island, in general, but this is a really amazing preserve. It has a little bit of everything, forests, wetlands, so it houses some really incredible animals, so it's an important place to protect here. Then our focus is the eastern tiger salamander. So although this salamander is our focus, protecting the work we do for the salamander is going to impact all organisms that also use vernal pools. So they're sort of like an umbrella species. Protecting them can help protect other species. So they're a fossorial species, which means they spend most of their time underground. In fact, 97% of their time is spent in these tunnels and burrow systems. They rarely ever make surface movements. They're a large, robust body. They can be 12 inches long. They're the largest salamander in the US, our terrestrial or land salamander. Their color patterns can vary, but they're dark brown, black, with kind of olive and yellow splotches. They have some grooves on the side of their body that help trap water. They need to stay really wet and moist. One of the reasons they stay underground, they're not drying up in the sun. So I have an example here. This is one of our captive tiger salamanders from the museum. So I'm just going to bring them over and pass them around just so you can get a close-up look at the animal that we're working with here. This is full size. So although they can be up to a foot long, we generally see them around 7 to 8 inches or so. Those are the size salamanders that I'm working with here in my project. So they're underground, right? But during the breeding season, the adults emerge from their burrows. So in late winter, early spring, here on Long Island, they can emerge as early as January through March or so. On rainy nights above freezing, they emerge from these burrows. They travel to what are called vernal pools. Vernal pools are seasonal wetlands. We'll talk about them in a little more detail next. They're very sensitive ecosystems. That's where they go to complete their breeding cycle. So they lay large gelatinous egg masses. These egg masses are attached to sticks and twigs lining the bottom of these pools. Eventually, the larvae hatch, breathing through gills, just like an axolotl. They spend several weeks, month or two in the pond, breathing through those gills. They absorb the gills, metamorphosize, and move on to land. Once they move on to land, not much is known about where these critters are going, what they're doing, how far they're traveling. So, we were just saying how they go to these vernal pools, right? So vernal pools, the key is their seasonality. They're what we call ephemeral wetlands. So they vary, they're seasonal, they actually dry up. So vernal pools, unlike coastal plain ponds, they don't connect to the water table. So they get their water from snowmelt and rainwater in the spring. Because of this, they actually dry up by the end of the year, which is really key. So they are fishless. Because they dry up, fish aren't able to lay eggs and establish. So that's really the key. But these pools are small, they lack an inlet and outlet or a connection to the water table. They're usually found in forested areas. So they can be easily missed. Because they're seasonal, they're small, they don't seem significant, but they're really important for obligate species. So there are several species who require vernal pools to complete their breeding cycle. The eastern tiger salamander is one of those. Several other salamander species, as well as some invertebrate species like fairy shrimp, and a couple plant species as well. So these vernal pools are really important for several groups. They also provide water, food sources for other animals in these forested areas. They're also carbon sinks. They help sequester carbon. So they're really, really important to us and to animals. But again, they're really sensitive because of their seasonality. They're sensitive to pollution because they tend to be in low areas. Everything runs off into those areas, polluting them. So unfortunately, they're destroyed quite easily. So our true question is, given the fossorial lifestyle of this tiger salamander, little is known about what happens once they leave the pond. They go underground in tunnels and burrows, but where? How far are they traveling? Which is one of our biggest questions. The reason for that is vernal pools as a wetland do have some levels of protections if they have certain animals in it, like a tiger salamander. But there are what we call buffer zones, which are areas around the ponds that need to be protected to continue the life cycle of this animal. So it's 535 feet is the first kind of buffer zone, and then there's another buffer zone at about 1,000 feet. But we had a feeling that these salamanders might use areas outside of that as well. And then what upland habitat types are utilized? Are they just using deciduous forests? Are they using the pine barrens? Are they using field habitats? Where are they going once they actually leave the pond? And then how often are they moving burrows? How many burrows do they have? How big is their home range, the area they spend their time? So we have several questions, but the key really is the distance tiger salamanders move from the pond. So because of their fossorial or underground lifestyle, they're really hard to track, right? We can't visually follow them around like we can with a lot of animals. So that's where radio telemetry comes in. It's the preferred method for tracking a lot of different animal species. Again, Toby, who's going to be tracking sharks, he uses the same sort of techniques here that I'm using on an animal that's the size of a salamander. So this uses radio signals to track animal movement. So that means we can track animals without visually observing them. So there's a couple pieces of equipment I have here on the table, and these are our 3 critical pieces. So one is our radio receiver. This radio receiver is just like your car radio receiver, right? You can tune into different stations. So this radio receiver allows us to listen to different stations. Each station would be a different Salamander's tag. So we can dial into different frequencies, just like we could in our car radio. Then this is our actual tag. I'm going to pass this around. This is it. This is what allows me to track the animal. This is a 2-stage crystal-controlled implant transmitter. So it produces a radio frequency, radio waves, just like a radio station does. So each transmitter has a specific frequency like a specific station. So if I want to find this salamander, I can dial in his frequency on my receiver. So how do we actually listen for these now? That's where our antenna comes in. This is our Yagi antenna. So this is just like a car antenna. It helps us pick up the signal. It is directional. So I need to be pointing it in the right direction to pick up a signal. So that's the basics, and we'll go through how this actually works. So each beep is a different station, but we'll get into that. So since each transmitter emits a different frequency, I can tune in my radio receiver to a specific transmitter or a specific salamander. So I'm going to adjust what's called the gain setting. And gain is our sensitivity. So when I put this transmitter in the animal and I'm listening for beeps. The louder the beep is, the closer I am to that animal. So gain is our sensitivity. So I start out with a really high sensitivity so I could find the general direction of the animal. And as I get closer, I actually make my equipment less sensitive, so I have to be closer to that animal to get a beep. I've found that I'm able to get within 2 feet or so of where the salamander actually is. So what I do is I go out with my Yagi antenna, and I start moving the antenna in all directions around myself, listening for an initial beep. I'm going to find out where the sound drops off, and then I'm just going to cut the distance. So if my sound drops off right here and right here, I'm going to move straight down the middle. And again, the beeps will get louder if I'm moving in the right direction. So I'm going to continue in the direction of the loudest beep and repeat the process. It's sort of trial and error. You have to get a feel for what a beep actually sounds like and what it sounds like when you're on top of that animal. And again, we'll do a little demonstration so you can actually see this technique. But to track these salamanders, remember these guys spend a lot of time underground. So a lot of times when we track animals with tags, they're placed on the outside of their bodies. Birds can have backpacks. Things like frogs can wear little belts. But because of these guys, how they burrow, any external tag would get ripped off as they burrow. So several years ago, a new technique came out for surgical implantation of these transmitters. So I started with 10 male tiger salamanders in 2023. I captured an additional 10 this year. I captured them with a variety of techniques, one being the minnow trap. I set these in their pools as they're breeding. They're funneled in. They can swim out. They don't realize. They tend to just sit in the bottom. I also captured them going into the ponds with dip nets and waders. So I was allowed 5 salamanders from each of our breeding ponds. The first year, I was only able to capture 10. This year, I captured an additional 10, but some of these salamanders were from a third pool we have in the back. But I captured the salamanders. I held them for several days before the surgery to make sure they were in good condition for the surgery. There's a couple requirements. I wanted this tag to weigh less than 5% of the total body weight of the salamander. So these tags are pretty small. They're 0.9 grams. So I wanted it to be below 5%. I was able to get most salamanders big enough where this is less than 3% of their body weight. So it's not enough to impact how these salamanders move, not heavy enough for them to feel it. But I held them for several days to make sure they're in good body condition. They are anesthetized, so they are unconscious for the procedure. We use MS-222. It's commonly used for fish. They're in a deep plane of anesthesia. They're not feeling pain or anything like that. So I made a small incision in their body cavity, so the stomach area. The incision's only about 1 centimeter or 2. the transmitters are placed within the body cavity. This antenna I trimmed down, and I'll pass this tag around it, but you can also feel it's very flexible. But this is trimmed down before it's implanted. I'd like to pass that around. See, it's very small. The bulk of that is actually the battery. It's a silver oxide battery like your watch battery. But they're placed in the body cavity, and then they're sutured. The incision is sutured closed. So to do that, we have to use really small sutures. The suture material we use is 6/0, so that's the same thickness as a strand of your hair. So we're tying sutures with something that's, the thickness of your strand of your hair. It takes several sutures to close the wound, 3 to 5 depending on the animal. Then they go into recovery. So they're treated with antibiotics and pain medication for 5 days. I monitor to make sure they're feeding and properly digesting their food and passing their food before they're released. So if there was any issues, we'd hold on to them, treat them before release. All 20 surgeries so far have been successful. Movement data suggests all the salamanders healed up great. I actually found one 10 days after I released it. I don't normally get to see them when I track, and the wound was completely healed, and it was very active. So it's a really, really great technique here. And I close the wounds just with a little simple suture there. So then they're held for 5 days and released back into the pond that I captured them from. So this just shows the ponds. This is Vineyard Field. So we're right here in the barn. This is the area behind the museum. This is Pond 1. It's the pond right behind us. We can see when we leave here. The second pond in the study area is out in the middle of the field. And the third one, you can't really tell it's a pond because it dries up, is right in the back. So those are our 3 vernal pools that we're studying here. And that is Vineyard Field, which is the field behind the museum, and that's my study area. Just a couple photos. Here it's a little bit hard to tell, but this area is the incision and the sutures. This is release. You can see they're in great condition. Us catching some salamanders. We do have to go at night. And then just an example of the trap there. So then the tracking methodology. Once we released, we track these guys at least twice a week. We record their location just with a little handheld GPS unit, like a Garmin, like you might use for hiking. And then I map and analyze the data using GIS programs, which is Geographic Information Systems. I can generate home ranges, which is the area the animal uses, core use areas, which is like the percentage of the time they're in an area, and then I can calculate movement and distance from the pond. So I'm still working on going through the data as we collect, and then in the final year we'll really get that full data analysis. But there are a couple things that I have already started to see just as I collect this data. So one, movements between burrows by eastern tiger salamanders are triggered by heavy precipitation events. These salamanders aren't moving burrows unless it's inch plus of rain. They need really wet conditions. I think this is when they can make surface movements to make really long scale movements. But they have really small home ranges. So once they do get to the area they want to be, it's really small. They spend most of their time in about a 1 to 2 meter area. That's where they're feeding. That's where they're spending most of their time. And then this is really key here. So we found that these salamanders use burrows in every single habitat type we have out back. We have some in the old field area out in the middle with no cover. We have some in our pine stands and some in the deciduous forest out back. So the reason that's so important is tiger salamanders are thought to live in pine barren and pitch pine oak forests. That's not what we have out back. So any literature that the DEC has, which is our Department of Environmental Conservation, lists their habitat type as pine barrens and pitch pine oak forest. That's a problem for things like development. If someone wants to develop a field, it's very easy for them to say there can't be tiger salamanders here because it's a field habitat. So this is really key that we were able to document various habitat types. Now if people try to challenge that, we have data to back up that they do use field habitats. They will use pine stands. So that's really, really exciting and really good for the tigers and their conservation. And then we found a lot of salamanders do hang out pretty close to the pond, but they can and will use upland habitat well beyond the 535-foot buffer zone. I've had salamanders well outside the 1,000-foot buffer zone as well. So that's pretty key because, again, we're only protecting a certain area around the pond. So a lot of the salamanders do spend a lot of time close to the pond, and I think there's a couple reasons for that, but just want to show you some points. These are our GPS points from the first year. So this is our first pond. All the salamanders using the area around the pond. You can see some are in the field, some are in this pine grove, some are in the shrubby understory over here. These salamanders are using mounds, root systems from shrubs directly on the side of this pond. There's very minimal cover there. It's pretty open, just shrubby, kind of thick growth. And then you could see a couple salamanders are using the forest in the back there. And then this is a compilation of last year's points and this year's points. So you can see we have some unique points here, and they're all utilizing different areas. This is one of my favorites here. You can see he's in the middle of the field. There's no cover out there. He's using an abandoned root system and tunnel from, a small mammal. And then we have another one out in the middle of the field and some in some really, really thick cover in the back here. So I want to open up for some questions, but I just want to say, give a thank you to the Holloman Price Foundation for funding this study. It wouldn't have been possible without their support. So if you have any questions, and then we can also get out for a demonstration to actually see how this program works. Yep.
I'll never forget my first pet. I was 5.
Yep.
I was a salamander in like a milk box.
Mm-hmm.
And the most fascinating thing was it changed colors.
Yep. Yeah. So they could sort of change. Yep. Yeah, so they can sort of darken and lighten their colors a little. And exactly, so a lot of people have that experience. Salamanders were once way more common than they are now. They're on the decline, unfortunately, and development is one of the biggest reasons, development and pollution. And that's why this study is important, because we want to protect the areas around these pools better for these animals. Yep.
What's their lifespan, and have some of them, how long are they trapped?
So that's a great question. So lifespan, we had a western tiger salamander, which is a subspecies, a gray tiger, that was 30 plus years old. They're commonly thought tigers to live 15 to 20, 15 to 25 even. They're pretty long-lived critters. So I can only track them for one season. So that's a really great question. Our biggest limitation for this project is the battery life of the transmitter. It's that watch battery, that silver oxide watch battery. It can only last so long. It lasts several months. So I get through the summer, which is the time they're moving the most. Once it gets into the heat of the summer, too hot, they kind of stay pretty stagnant. Well, it's thought at least. I would love to be able to get a full year, because it'd be really interesting to see how they move back into the ponds. So I think this technology is only going to get better. It's rapidly changing. So I think in the future, the transmitters will be powerful enough to last. And again, I went really conservative with this. I could have used transmitters that were almost double the weight I was approved for, but I wanted to make it as easy on the salamanders as possible. Sacrifice some data, make it a little harder on me to find them, but I'd rather do it that way. And they are state endangered species, a lot of permitting and a lot of care to make sure they're properly cared for in this project. So, have any other questions? Yep.
We had such a dry fall this year. Do you think that had any adverse effect on the salamanders? Because we went for almost 90 days with no rain.
Yeah, so definitely. They're limited in their movements. So again, they're sort of trapped in the burrow they're at. If they don't have the food resources, it's not a good spot for them. If they are forced to make a movement, for food, they're really at risk of drying. So I have found not tiger salamanders, but other salamanders you can tell are, desiccated, not in good shape. They were trying to make an overland movement in the heat. So that's a big problem. It also affects their breeding. Not as much the tiger, we'll see as we get into the winter, but there's another species called the marbled salamander. They're a fall breeder. I did not see a breeding event this year for those salamanders. It was just too dry. So that's unfortunate. It's definitely, going to have an impact on the population. Any other questions before we head on outside? Yeah?
When they're in the burrow, do they go into a hibernation mode?
So,
Or do they shut down?
So during the winter, when it's pretty cold, since they are cold-blooded, their movement's pretty slowed down. So they're not too active. So in the heat of the summer, they're not as active, and then in the real cold of the winter. So Our amphibians, a lot of people think of them as like tropical, and many can be tropical, but our salamanders specifically are more like temperate. They really like that like 60-degree kind of area. I mean, when they breed, it's, you know, it can be 40 degrees out. I've seen them breeding under the ice in the frozen ponds. So, you know, in the heat of the summer, they're not moving too much, and in that cold, it definitely curtails their movements for sure. Yep.
When you were capturing the salamanders this season, did you capture any from the previous?
I didn't. So that is actually a good sign. So when you're doing something like this, if you're getting a lot of what we call a recapture, if you're capturing the same salamanders, that indicates a small population. So the movement data suggests all those salamanders from last year survived. So that's really great. So it's not that they didn't make it to breed this year. That suggests that the population's, you know, bigger if we're not catching the same salamanders over and over. So we'll see next year, now that we have more I've tagged, if, you know, we start to get some recaps. So we'll see. Because I would be able to tell, you know, during surgery for sure. So, yeah, great question.
Are salamanders indigenous to this community where they come, I mean, from a ship?
Yeah, so these guys have been here, you know, pretty much since the formation of Long Island. So these salamanders, these tiger salamanders, yeah, came from a coastal plain community like 10,000 years ago with the formation of Long Island. So they've been here pretty much since the beginning. They were once, it was thought that especially the tiger salamanders were once super widespread. They were probably breeding in almost every pool across Long Island. We still have some that are doing great, like our spotted salamanders, but the tigers are definitely struggling.
How many eastern tiger salamanders do you think we have?
It's so hard to guess. I really am not sure. I would think the populations would hopefully be several hundred, hopefully more. I'm not sure though, but I hope a couple hundred, but I'm not sure. I see in the pond at one time visually I've seen, you know, as many as 15 different, and you're only seeing a really small portion, but they're not big numbers. Like our spotted salamanders, I've seen 200 in a pond at one time. So their populations are probably in the thousands in an area. So very much lower population densities. I think tiger salamanders have always had lower population densities than spotteds, but they are on the decline, unfortunately. I think just, you know, a lot of habitat development, and there was never as many to begin with as our spotted salamanders. Yep.
How long do the training devices last?
Really good question. So I implant them in early March, and then I get into mid-July or so. Yep, and so that also depends on what's called pulse rate. So the transmitter only makes a beep at certain intervals. The longer the interval, I can have the battery life last longer, but it's a lot harder to find them. So I kind of have medium ground. It beeps every 8 seconds, I think. So the battery is pretty good. But again, I think the technology is only going to get better. I think they're going to figure out different, you know, kind of batteries for those. So I think it'll be better in the future, and even smaller than that. Yep.
If you were to find a salamander that you had already implanted a chip inside, would you be able to, like, do a surgical procedure on that salamander again to either retrieve the last tracker or put a new tracker in?
That's a good question. So it's likely that I would remove the transmitter. I wouldn't put a new one in because I want as many like unique individuals as possible for this to kind of get a wider variety of data. And then just, you know, for the salamander, just even though they do heal up great, I don't want to, you know, be too hard on the salamanders. So yeah, really good question. So I won't track them a second time. Mm-hmm. So that, luckily, it's encased in that kind of silicone stuff, and there's nothing in their stomach cavity where it's going that is like abrasive on that. So that transmitter should last the lifespan of the salamander. Really good question. Mm-hmm.
So earlier you said you captured 10 males. Did you only capture those? Why you don't?
Yep, great question. So Only capturing males is a condition of our license from the DEC. So when they granted us the license to do this, they said you can only take males. They're also the ones who came up with the number of 5 per pond. And I probably would have done this anyways. So the reason we're not using females is because they're the ones producing eggs, right? They're the ones who are really increasing the population. They're the egg layers. So we don't want to do anything that's going to impact them laying eggs. So it's best to just leave the females be. So I think we'd get some different data, but this will do for us. So I think the males actually, tend to stay closer. I think if we had females, we'd see even farther movements. The males don't want to get too far because they want to be the first ones back in the pond when it comes breeding time. In salamanders, there's usually a lot more male salamanders than females, so there's some competition. So the males want to be back in the pond first. So I think it's sort of a balance. They want to find an area that has good resources that's still kind of, close enough to the pond to get to. So I think the bigger movements are really, to find resources, to find suitable burrows. But if they do find stuff close by, a lot of times they're going to use that because they want to get right back in the following year. But females, I think, would travel a lot larger. There has been other studies, too, that suggest that they kind of move to better resources. They want the best stuff. They're the ones laying the eggs again, which is a lot on them. Any other questions? All right, so we could just head outside for a quick demo. We won't go in, long grass or anything like that. And if we have that transmitter floating around, we'll need that. So I'm going to put together the equipment. So the one thing I didn't mention was just our little cable. That's a coaxial cable, pretty common. Let me see, that one is a female, I believe. Oh, so that's another point. So especially during the breeding season, so the males and females have a cloaca. The cloaca is where they go to the bathroom. It also houses their reproductive organs. The males, it swells up during the breeding season, filled with spermatophores, which is what they lay on the bottom of the pond. The females pick them up, fertilizes the eggs. So the males will have a bulge at the base of the tail. It's pretty easy to see, especially in the breeding season. It's very, very clear. You could tell, if I pointed it out to you, you could easily determine on your own. So again, each transmitter has a specific frequency, right? So this one beeps at a frequency of 150.28. So with my receiver here, I'm going to turn it on, and I have it dialed to 150.281. Turn up our gain. You're going to hear a beep. The buzzing is interference, right? So there's a lot of stuff around us. The signals are bouncing around, but can you hear that beep? Give it a second. So I'm going to go put this transmitter out here a little bit. And you'll see. So when I'm on top of the transmitter, you can follow me out here so you can hear through our speaker. It's got a pretty good beat. Hear the beat? Sort of a high. And I use headphones when I do this, a lot easier. So every 8 seconds or so, there's a pretty solid beat. If I were to move away or point it in a different direction, so my sensitivity is high, we're going to start to lose the beat. So I have a little beep going. When I point it this way, I lose a signal. So what I would do to find that transmitter or that salamander, I would start in each direction. I would start all the way to the extreme this direction. And again, you have to wait because it's only 8 seconds it's beeping. So you can't continuously move it. So I got a beep, then I would move out a little bit towards the middle. I'd wait for a beep, out this way, and out this way. I'm looking for where the signal drops off. So if it drops off here and here, I want to split the middle. I would walk a little bit farther up, depending, and then I would listen for my beeps again. So you can hear that loud beep, right, when I get close to it. So that's what it sounds like when you're right on top of them. So that beep when you're right on top of them, it sort of almost echoes a little bit like that, and that's when you can tell you're right on these salamanders. The detection range is really good. When I'm on my low sensitivity, I get a beep. You can see, so I'm able to narrow in, even right here. I lose my signal. So I have to be right on top of it when I'm on that low setting to actually get a beep. So I can really dial in. I've been able to really figure out, exactly where that salamander is. And again, since they're underground, I don't have to see them. I can hear the beep. I know exactly where they are, even when they're in a tunnel, in a burrow.
When you point like the beep inside the animal, there is any?
No, no. Just like radio waves, like in our car and everything. Yep. And so this technique had to be peer reviewed and published and everything like that before people could actually do this. It's relatively new technique, 10 years ago or so, that they really started figuring this out. But you could hear that beeps pretty loud when we're on it. And then even here, I lose my signal. So you could see we're really able to pinpoint where these salamanders are.
So it's right there.
Yep. Well, so this was just our transmitter, but I can show you, so I don't have his frequency in, but one of the salamanders is actually using this root system right here. So this is our first breeding pond. This is where I captured the salamanders from. So you're welcome to come take a look. This is one of our pools. I call this Pond 1, just for my own purposes here. It's shallow. It doesn't get more than about 4 feet deep. It dries up. It doesn't always dry up completely, but it dries up enough where there's no fish. So this is our first pond. So this is where I captured them. You can see this guy made a pretty short movement, but then some of the salamanders from these ponds are way out in the middle of the field here. So it's really interesting the different areas they use. But he is right in the root system of that shrub. Pretty incredible. Yeah, and this is Pond 1. So I set traps in it to capture them. I go in at night. And they're only in the pond for about 2 weeks or so. So it's a really narrow window of time I can capture these salamanders. And then again, 97% of their time just tucked away underground. Anybody has any questions or anything like that, I'm here for you guys. If anybody wants to check this out and try it for themselves, you're more than welcome to as well. Going to play around with our radio telemetry. And again, this is a technique used for all different types of animals. When they're tracking sharks, they also use this. They also use a GPS tag, a satellite tag that gives them a GPS point. But once that satellite tag pops off, they can only get to within a mile of it or so, and they use radio telemetry to actually find the specific tag and pick it up out of the water. So it's a really cool technique that we can use from animals as small as a salamander up to creatures as large as a shark or an elephant. So really, really commonly used technique, and it has been for many years. Yeah, pretty lightweight, and that's called the Yagi antenna. The more poles you have, they're called elements, the more power it has, but 3 is pretty good for our purposes. And this is a very basic receiver. You can have a lot of different settings on this. I like to keep it simple. It does what I need it to do, and that way I'm not messing around with too many settings out in the field. All right, I think that'll about do it for us. We can... I love it. I'm all for it.
You said you trimmed the antenna. Does that affect the tracker in any way?
Great question. So yes, the longer the antenna, the farther the detection range, but this is a pretty small antenna to begin with, so when I cut it down, it doesn't affect it too much. But if it was, but when you cut the antenna, it does decrease the detection range, so I have to be a little bit closer to pick up a signal.
Could it work if there were no antenna?
Yes, but you'd have to be pretty close. But the reason I'm able to cut down the antennas is right because I know these are smaller animals. They're not like constantly moving on me. It's not like you're tracking something like, let's say, like a turkey. It can move really fast and move around. So I don't need too big of a detection range because I know the general area they're going to be, if you know what I mean.
Can that be used on Sasquatch?
Anything, any animal, people too, I'm sure. They make different tags too. So this one's an implantable one. They make like backpacks for things like turkeys or birds. They make collars for things like deer. So there's a lot of different uses for these. These are all, custom built. This is from Advanced Telemetry Systems. really amazing what they're able to do. Even the antenna, they were able to find me an antenna, you know, that's super flexible. And
Jake, I'm curious because this is kind of, you know, considering the size of the salamander.
so it
like,
sits
how
right
it
back
is
in their
right back.
cavity, yeah, and the weight is so little, it doesn't put any pressure on their organs. They have a lot of open space in their
Okay.
stomach cavity, yeah.
And what kind of materials do you
So
use?
nope, everything's inside. So I cut it all down just like that. Yep. I forget the type of wire. It's a specific wire to be
Yeah,
really
because it's
flexible.
very flexible.
Yep, super soft and flexible, so it doesn't poke. Exactly. And again, the bulk of the transmitter is the battery. So I think that's going to get
Do
even
you have
better
a
over
video
time.
of the incision, like the procedure doing?
I have one that I have to put together a little bit. I was
That would be nice.
solo this year. Yep.
Yeah,
So
that would be nice for
you know, that was my focus, but I would like to get that together at some point.